Hello, and welcome to my review of Mars 2120. A code, or the beta press review of this game, was provided by QUByte, the developers / publishers, but I'd already bought the early access to the title. I've had it for 2 years, so this review is not sponsored. I just got a little bit of a slightly earlier look at the full game, which is due to come out on the 1st of August 2024. Let us begin. The metroidvania space is oversaturated, detrimentally so. Indie devs of even the most anticipated titles right now are struggling to make any kind of headway in the numbers on Steam, and there is also a bit of an air of frustration from a fairly vocal part of the metroidvania quote-unquote community, which is no doubt due to the continued absence of any kind of real information about the Silksong release, and Team Cherry just aren't communicating on that front. So the frustration is growing. One of the many reasons why I avoid the Metroidvania subreddit, and why I don't tend to look at many Metroidvania things on social media or YouTube. My hype for Silksong is dead, and has been for a couple of years at this point, but I still love the genre. I am getting to a point. I love the genre. I'm still looking out for games and developers that seem to understand the pillars of the Metroidvania game design experience, developers and games that have really good ideas. And looking at the systems and looking through the script that I've written out for this review, Mars 2120 is definitely a game where the developers have got a lot of really good ideas. It's a 2.5D sci-fi Metroidvania. It's been in early access for a couple of years, and it clearly owes a chunk of its DNA to games like Metroid Dread, and I can't remember whether it was Samus Returns or Return of Samus on the 3DS. But there's also a reasonable chunk of 2009's Shadow Complex here as well. And it's definitely a game that doesn't have the budget of a first-party Nintendo title. Nowhere near. It's a somewhat non-linear Metroidvania set, surprise surprise, on Mars, clues in the title for that. And the world seems to have undergone some kind of conflict, but I've got to admit, it's never really explained exactly what has gone on. The story, such as it is a little bit bare bones and relayed through one of 26 audio logs that are found throughout the play space. I don't really know what the story of Mars 2120 is. There might be more information out there. There's no intro sequence really or anything to the game. You know, you start off, you go through a cinematic gauntletty thing where the land collapses around you. You make your way inside the complex. You see a little cutscene where the first enemy leaps at you, and that's kind of it. There's blood everywhere, there's a load of killer robots and alien creatures, and it's like, okay, stuff has happened. And the audio logs kind of hint at humanity's involvement in that, but realistically there's not much of a setup. As opposed to a lot of modern indie Metroidvanias where you go to a biome, you find the Metroidvania power, the traversal power in that biome, and you can basically clean up everything in that zone with the occasional thing that you might have to come back for that's optional. Mars 2120 actually has you ping-ponging all over the place, right from the get-go. And it actually has some opportunity for doing things in, I think, unexpected orders. I'm not going to say unintended. I don't think I managed to sequence break the game through clever use of game mechanics, but I definitely did things in, I think, the wrong order. You know, I found the lava boss from the game's trailer, I think, earlier than I should have done. And while it was a bit of a slog, I was able to defeat it, get it to unlock, and then continue progressing through the game with, I think, a power that I realistically shouldn't have had for the intended critical path. Nothing broke, apart from maybe some kind of objective markers. But, yeah. I think the level designers clearly understand that part of the fun of Metroidvanias is finding all of the little hidden away upgrades all around the various map zones, or finding an obstacle that you need to come back to with the appropriate tools, which in this game's case are an appropriate elemental weapon. There are 3: fire, electricity and ice, and these weapons actually have traversal upgrades linked to them, and you need to find those upgrades individually. You don't just get the weapon and then get the suite of powers to go with it. No, you get the weapon and then you still need to make your way all of the way around the map to find each individual traversal power linked to it, and it flows quite well. It sounds like maybe it could be overwhelming, but actually I think it's really well thought out. Let's talk the weapons. First one you'll get is electricity themed, and this unlocks traversal abilities like an air dash that allows you to get through specific lightning aspected barriers. You can get a vertical dash, an uppercut essentially, that allows you to turn into an electrical current to flow down wires. It's essentially a fancy teleport from one point to another with very specific points, but it's a cool idea. Eventually you'll get a pulse parry, which allows you to block damage, and an overcharge ability that lets you slow down nearby traps and enemies, which, for example, enables you to slip between the blades of giant fans. Within the first couple of hours you'll also get the ice core, which gives you a shotgun, which can, surprise surprise, freeze enemies, and if you hold down the button you can actually charge it up to 3 levels for a longer distance, more devastating shots. The ice core and the shotgun gets upgrades for creating ice pillars on the ground in front of you that you can step on to get extra jump height, or it allows you to freeze water spouts that you can hop on to, which otherwise you couldn't get around. Or, and this one I think is really cool, you can drop ice grenades that will actually freeze bodies of water to create platforms so that you can cross. It also has a defensive ability which creates a giant shield of ice that you can carry, albeit at a movement penalty, and this absorbs the heavy fire of turrets, for example. The fire weapon, well, it's no surprising for guessing what kind of gun that turns into. It's a flamethrower, but its upgrades enable you to drop incendiary grenades, slide a trail of fire along the floor, letting you get through tiny gaps, and it's got a fiery uppercut and down smash as well. That lets you go through specific fiery portals. But that's not all, because as well as the range combat, the game's actually got a fairly robust melee system, with fighting game style button combinations for special moves. So if you've ever played Street Fighter, try out a Dragon Punch, or a Fireball, or a Flash Kick, and see what it does. However you defeat them, enemies drop XP orbs, and these XP orbs can be used to upgrade your stats, mostly passive stats. But you will need to find the appropriate blueprints to do so. And whilst these blueprints are mostly quite basic number tweaks like rate of fire, range of specific weapons like the shotgun, reload time, defense, health, etc., there are also modifiers for specific ability core cooldowns. So some affect your fire core, some affect your lightning abilities, some affect your ice abilities. And they even do slightly more interesting things like adding damage trails to your traversal moves of the appropriate elements. There are even 3 unique extra abilities, one for each weapon, that can have you sprinting around covered in electricity, or charging forwards with your big ice shield, slamming enemies in the face, or just essentially nuking the area with a fiery explosion. The blueprints for all of this stuff scattered around the game world, some in obvious places, some in less obvious places behind breakable walls, tucked away in corners. And while they're not mind-blowingly innovative, these blueprints, such as they are, ensure that exploring feels rewarding. In fact, let's talk exploration. Let's talk the map. The world map is broken up into multiple biomes. There are 5, 6, 6-ish of them. And those biomes are broken up into smaller zones because it's a 2.5D game, so it's got to be broken up a bit. And each map has its own fog of war that you're going to be uncovering as you go. And there are no custom map pins, which is something I would usually say, oh, big red flag. But actually, in Mars 2120, it's not bad at all, because as soon as you find an obstacle, or a collectible, or a door, or whatever, it is immediately marked on your map with an icon. A coloured icon representing the elemental core, for example, that you need to get past them, though not necessarily the specific power of that element. For example, barriers that require the flamethrower use the same red padlock icon as barriers that need the fire kick to get past. So you know you're going to need some kind of traversal power linked to the fire core, but you are still going to have to remember for yourself essentially which power you didn't have the last time. It sounds like it could get frustrating. It really didn't. So, doors, barriers and obstacles, collectibles, fast travel stations, save points, pretty much everything you could want is auto-marked on the map for you. And there are even accessibility options that you can use whenever you want that allows you to uncover the entire map from the get-go, if you want to, and uncover all of the different items and markers. And you can turn them on per category. You can turn them off entirely. You could actually kind of anonymize the icons, so you could show all the icons as question marks, so you know that there are things around, but you don't know exactly what they are until you go and pick them up. And when you have picked them up, the icons, or when you've picked them up, or when you've completed the challenge and got through the particular obstacle, that icon is left on the map, but it's faded out to show that it has been completed, overcome, collected, what have you. The biomes are split up, as I said, into usually 2 to 3 smaller areas, because this is it's an indie budget 2.5D game created in Unreal Engine, and you know, whilst not the best looking game, especially not by kind of 2024's bigger budget standards, looking at you Prince of Persia The Lost Crown, but the backgrounds and stuff does have some decent art direction, and the set pieces in many of the areas, of which there are several, are surprisingly well done. In fact, one of my favourite bits, and this is a teeny tiny detail, one of my favourite bits is finding a new tram station, a new fast travel point, because each of the tram stations has got its own unique animation for the platform starting up. It's a nice little touch in a game that that has a lot of nice little touches. Each biome's got a boss or two to defeat. The boss designs are kind of what you'd expect. They're very science fiction. There's, aliens, alien landscapes. They're pretty impressive to look at. You've got bloated blobs of mutated biomass. You've got mechanical monstrosities, many of which are elemental themed. And there's even a boss that's so big you can actually go inside of it for a bit. The variety of bosses and the set pieces that accompany them or are just elsewhere in the game are inspired and quite imaginative. Mechanically, if you've played Shadow Complex or more recently Tales of Kenzera, Zao, or the Mobius Machine, you've got a reasonable idea of how the game works and the shooting works especially. R2 in this particular game does all the firing, while the triangle or Y button, depending on what controller you're using, plus various directions on the D-pad or left stick, they change which traversal powers that you're going to use in L1 and R1 cycle through the three elements. It's a number that's good enough to enable the variety without falling into the trap that something like Soldiers did, where you've got 6 different elements and just swapping between them was a bit of a pain in the ass. 3 is a good number. So the shooting works fine for the most part, and getting around works fine for the most part, and the map and game space, actually, unlike Tales of Kenzera and unlike the Mobius Machine, the game space doesn't linger on a flat plane. It's not a 3D space that you always view from the same angle. There are actually several sections, several chunks of map where the game space just turns 90 degrees, more than 90 degrees, and has you running around perpendicular to the expected world. You're going round the corners and climbing the corners and sides of buildings, or you're twisting around running up a giant tower with a boss lumbering after you, a little bit like what they did in Bloodstained. But unlike that game, which tried to do that actually on the game map, for some of these more manipulated spaces, Mars 2120 has separate, unmapped quote-unquote areas, so that the devs can manipulate the space to their liking. So, almost 19 minutes into this video, on paper, Mars 2120 sounds like a really solid indie adventure in the style of Metroid Dread. On paper. Unfortunately, I feel that the developers bit off quite a lot more than they could chew. Mars 2120 is full of ambitious ideas and choices, and I wish I could say that those choices were all well realised. But, to put it bluntly, Mars 2120 has an exceptional level of jank. What do I mean by that? Well, basically every single system in the game that I have been talking about, that I've been praising, that I've sounded like I'm excited about, every single system has at least one or two teeny tiny minor issues that on their own would be perfectly acceptable, but cumulatively add up to a product that feels unfinished and unpolished. No matter how good its ideas are, when you've got something wrong with every single system that I can think of, it all adds up to this kind of feeling that's like, yeah, this could have done with a bit more time and a bit more polish. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. The save system. The game uses the classic old school hard save system, just like in Symphony of the Night. If you progress past the save point and you die, you lose your progress up until either the last save point or the last checkpoint until you quit out of the game, in which case, if you haven't hard saved at a save point, you lose any kind of checkpointed progress. It works. It 100% works fine. The game saves, the game loads. I had no issues at all with losing data or anything like that. And yet, sometimes the save screen will just appear and ask you whether you want to save to slot 1 or slot 2 or slot 3 or slot 4, even though you're not at a save point. And sometimes, if you have saved recently and you've gone off exploring, you'll be able to hear the cursor moving up and down on the save screen, despite the fact that you're not at the save screen. And then if you press the jump button, which is accept, the save screen will pop up and ask whether you want to overwrite your save. And so I'm not at a save point. I don't know why this is doing this. Zoning to a different area doesn't fix this. You'll have to reload. So that's one example. I've already said that the map marks everything from collected and uncollected power-ups, tram stations, barriers of all elemental kinds, and area transitions, except when it doesn't. There are at least a couple of really important instances. Following objective markers heading to the greenhouse entrance being the earliest example I can think of, where it just doesn't mark the entrance to the biome that you're supposed to use on your map. In the greenhouse's case, which is a fairly early one, the entrance is at the end of a corridor that looks otherwise empty. But there's a door. There's a door at the end of that corridor that everywhere else on the map, that kind of door is marked with a purple door icon. You need to use your electric cord to shoot the door to open it. There are ice doors, there are fire doors. This is an electric door. But for whatever reason, it's just not marked in this location. So I wandered around, got lost, ended up fighting that lava boss way early because I couldn't figure out how to get to the greenhouse, just because that door and the transition to the greenhouse wasn't marked on. It's weird because in that zone there's a clear door transition to greenhouse south, which you can't get through because it's one way. But there's no mention at all that further up, oh, this is where the transition to greenhouse entrance is going to be. It just makes no sense. It's mind-boggling that it's just not there. The world map gives you a nice overview of the game world, except that later on in the game, when you're doing cleanup, you'll be wanting to kind of zoom in and out of the different bits of the map. And each time you zoom in and out, it resets your cursor back to where you are. So you have to keep on scrolling or tabbing around as it is with the right stick between the different zones before you can zoom in. So that's kind of annoying, world map wise. Another tiny thing is that the surface east location is west of the surface west location on the map. And there's an area, and I'm not going to spoil the area, but there's an area in the game that actually does have a map that isn't on the world map. It's a transition area, so realistically it should be there, but it's not. You have to travel to it to look at its map, which wouldn't normally be an issue, but there's a hidden collectible on that map. So when you're trying to look around for all the things that you've lost, it was the last one that I found, the last collectible that I needed. And I'd forgotten that there was this small transition area that also had a map, but it's not on the world map. Bosses. The bosses in the game have got really interesting designs in the sense that they're visually cool. You can see a lot of potential with them for interesting mechanics, but most of them don't have interesting mechanics. Most of them are really boring and dull to fight. Several of them have got huge periods of "you can't hurt me" invincibility, where you just have to kind of hope that the next attack that their programming chooses for them is the one that you can actually do something about. For example, the big lava magma boss from the game trailer. I'll keep on talking about that one because it's in the trailer. It took me 15 incredibly dull minutes to kill, because most of the time the enemy had no damageable spots. I couldn't do anything to it. Avoiding its attacks was really easy. I wasn't in any danger of dying, but most of the time it wasn't in any danger of taking damage because it had no damageable areas. I do think that I found him probably quite early, and there's probably a power that I could get later on that would have made him easier to kill, but I hadn't got it. He wasn't challenging, it was just long-winded. And yet there were a couple of bosses that you can obliterate in 2 or 3 seconds, because the fire grenades that you can get have a lingering flame effect that can be stacked on top of each other, and they just obliterate certain enemy health bars. The lumbering green giant enemy that you can see in the trailer, it died in 2 seconds. It's like, balance? No. I kind of want to talk about the final boss encounter. I don't want to spoil anything, but I do kind of want to mention it because it's a really interestingly designed encounter on paper. But there's a weird teleportation pattern memorization section in the middle of the boss encounter, which absolutely murders the pace. And all of the unlocks and the powers and the elemental weapons that you've got in the last phase of the fight, the boss strips those away from you, and means that you have to do the final 5 to 10% of the fight with the same kind of powers and movesets that you had at the start, i.e. your pea shooter and your double jump. And it feels a bit rough, to say the least. Having gone through 10 plus hours of going around and collecting all of this cool stuff, it gets taken away from you. Like, take away our cool stuff at the start of the game, the abilities, as you'll get in a Metroid game, that's fine. You'll get your powers back, and by the end of the game, you'll be a badass. Removing our powers one by one at the end of the game, not a fan. Let's talk guns, because this is a shooter. Guns in a shooter, quite important. Unfortunately, 2 of the 3 guns in Mars 2120 don't feel very good. You know, the electric gun and the ice shotgun, they both feel better than they did in the early access build I played a couple of years ago, but they still don't feel or sound great, to the extent actually that I mostly mellowed my way through the game. I did use the flamethrower quite a bit, because the flamethrower feels really decent to use, but it's got a short range and it slows down your movement while firing. And even with the auto aim turned on, the flying enemies of the game are really hard to hit because they are very, very quick. But the melee system also has its own problems, because a lot of enemies have their own melee attacks, which is fine, but they don't have a tell that they're going to use their melee attacks. I'm thinking specifically the kind of human-esque ones. The big lumbering enemies, they've got a bit of a wind-up and they're quite predictable, but the human enemies, their melee attack is so fast that you've got no idea it's going to happen, and because you don't have really any defenses for something that quick, you're going to get hit and you are going to get knocked back, and the knockback is going to send you flying. And I do mean flying, and it's always going to send you flying. Alucard in Symphony of the Night flies a shorter distance when he gets hit than you do in Mars 2120. I can't actually remember whether you're invincible in Symphony of the Night when you get hit. Are you invincible until you hit the ground and get back up? Because you are not in Mars 2120. You can get juggled to death if you hit an enemy and then hit another enemy or an enemy projectile while you are in the air. And there's no way of getting back up that I could find. There's no tech that gets you, out of that falling state. So you can get juggled to death. And you can get knocked back by an enemy, into a pit, which is instant death. We'll talk about that in a second. On the subject of being hit, enemies have got status effects too. And if you, like me, have a bit of an old tendon injury, I really hope that you don't mind joystick waggling, because if you get frozen, and you will, often, by flying enemies that cannonball across the screens from off-screen, you're going to have to waggle the stick to break free. Button mashing doesn't seem to do anything. It's stick waggling. And actually, on the subject of off-screen, there's quite a lot of things happening off-screen because the camera often struggles to keep up with you. There's at least a couple of sections in the Foundry where you can literally walk off a ledge into molten metal because the camera is right at the edge of it and you've got no way of knowing that is going to happen. There's another area down in the bottom left-hand corner, which I'm not going to spoil the name for. You can come through a door where the camera cuts and immediately fall into water because there's no safe zone. It's just door, then water. And unless the camera happens to want to make that transition a bit quicker, or you've remembered that it's there, you're going to fall off and you're going to die. Because you will fall. And you will die, because falling into most hazards, water, molten metal, etc., it outright kills you. None of this respawning at the nearest safe ground with a little bit of health loss. No, you are dead. Reload your save or go back to the checkpoints. I mean, the checkpoints are reasonably frequent, but still, it's a very, very old school, blasphemous, spiky pit trap, instant death style feel to it. It's a good job, actually, that the load times, at least on the NVMe that I'm running on, are super fast. Hopefully, it's the same on an SSD or on consoles. Achievements. The game's got a full suite of achievements. Most of them are fairly straightforward to get. Mostly they work. Mostly. Most work, some don't. For example, I got the achievement for finding all the secret areas in the game just before finding another 2 secret areas. That one doesn't work. And I've collected 26 audio logs. And I know I've collected 26 audio logs because I've marked them all on the map that I've created for the game. But I don't have the achievements for having collected all 26 audio logs. So, whilst the achievements mostly work, these two not quite working. Finally is in the sense this is the last one that I want to talk about. One of the last many kind of tiny niggles. There are others, but I don't want this to be massively long. There's no indicated point of no return, so you can stumble into the final encounter in the game without really meaning to and without really understanding what is going on, because as I've said, the story, such as it is told through audio logs and it doesn't really exist. So you're probably going to be quite confused as to what is going on, why you're fighting it, why it's fighting you, what on Mars is even going on. And you can just stumble into that, have the final boss fight, or encounter realistically rather than fight, which I've already mentioned, and then you get kind of thrown into the ending sequence, which probably makes sense to the developers, but yeah, well, I'd already found it had been 2+ hours between me running into that and finding most of the audio logs, so I'd forgotten most of what was going on. Not that it really explains it anyway. So it probably sounds like I'm being super nitpicky, but this really is a kind of death of 1,000 cuts in terms of how all of these little niggles are adding up. You know, on their own, none of these things would be, you know, a massive deal breaker. I mean, okay, the boss fight's being a bit meh, yeah, okay, but if it was just one boss out of the whole suite that was a bit dull to fight, that'd be fine. Or if it was just one of the guns that felt a bit meh and the other two were fine, you know, it would be fine. But there's loads of little tiny things. You know, this is an indie game. I know this is an indie game. It is a small game, a small dev team. It's not expensive. You know, I give them huge amounts of praise and credit, and I tried to do that at the start of this review. I really wanted people to understand that the ideas and systems at work here are inspired and interesting and have huge amounts of potential. Now, I love the thought that has been put into the systems and abilities and the world design, but all of these teeny tiny issues add up to a product that feels rough. And considering the game has been in early access for a couple of years, I think it's probably going to take several months to really iron out some of these issues. You know, a lot of them, the game feel ones, I don't think are going to be quick fixes. You know, the feeling of the guns is going to require reworked audio. It's going to require reworked animations on the enemies to give the weapons a feeling of punch. You know, that's going to take time and effort if they have the time and money to work on it more. They might not. I don't know. So it's an accumulation of dozens of teeny tiny things that don't quite work right or feel a bit off, rather than just one thing that drags the whole product down. And I think because it's got so many little niggles as opposed to just one big niggle, that's probably going to be harder to fix. The game's just... It just feels undercooked. It just feels like it's not ready. And whilst there is certainly a world here to explore, and there is enjoyment to be had, and the world is well designed and somewhat expansive in the right metroidvania ways, you know, it's clear that the devs know what they are doing in terms of how do we create a solid metroidvania experience. Actually playing the game moment to moment just feels... It feels jank. It feels rough. Yeah, the power's rewarding, the exploration is rewarding, even the audio logs are, you know, okay in terms of story. So if you just want some platformer action and you like to uncover a map and, you know, experience a new world and find new stuff, there's definitely a video game here to play. Just don't expect a Metroid Dread clone. Don't expect anything up to Dread's standard. I think Mars 2120 is best compared to Shadow Complex, and unfortunately that game came out in 2009 and it feels more polished than Mars 2120 does, assuming you can look past Shadow Complex's very cheesy story. You know, Mars 2120 is certainly a more ambitious title. It's more ambitious than Shadow Complex, it's more ambitious than Tales of Kenzera. I'd argue it's more ambitious than the Mobius Machine, although the Mobius Machine's got quite a large world. Mars 2120, I think, has more variety in terms of its systems and its environments. So, yeah, I really wanted to like Mars 2120. I love me a good sci-fi shooting Metroidvania, and this has got so many good ideas for systems and explorations, but it feels rough to play. So, verdict, such as it is. At one point, during the final boss encounter, in fact, I seriously wondered if I would have to add a tier below D tier on my Metroidvania tier list. For those of you who don't know, I have a tier list available at demajen.co.uk/tierlist.html, I think it is. Just go to demajen.co.uk, it's a big link at the top. My D tier stands for does, D is for does, some things right. C is for competent, B is better than most, and so on and so forth. D tier is for essentially Metroidvanias that I finished but I wasn't a massive fan of. You know, if I dislike the game and don't think it's any good, I don't finish it. So that goes under F, or did not finish. D tier is for games that I found at least enough enjoyment in to actually finish, because they did some things right. But I wanted to finish Mars 2120, so it's like, well, I can't put it in F, because I am going to finish it. So I had to do some reflection, and having spent now about 15 hours putting together a map for the game, and I have done a map for the game, I realised that despite all the death by 1,000 paper cuts, I did actually get a fair chunk of enjoyment out of several small parts of Mars 2120's experience. It does indeed do some things right. Would I say it's a competent release? No. Unfortunately, I would not. There are some things in it that are competent. Its systems and ideas are definitely competent. But its gameplay is rough, janky, unpolished, needs work. So it does some things right. Thus D tier is where it belongs. And I've got my fingers crossed. I'm hopeful that with further polish, time, probably money, access to more player critique, Mars 2120 can live up to the ideas and the systems and the worlds that the devs have created. But it's not there at launch. Thank you very much for watching. Bit of a long video, this kind of an in-depth review, I suppose, of Mars 2120. Let me know down below, was this long format review helpful for you? People have asked me to do more reviews. I'll do them when I can, because writing scripts and talking for almost 45 minutes is kind of exhausting, and I've still got to go and find footage to put over the top of this. It's not going to be, you know, tailored footage for the things that I'm saying. It's just going to be generic stuff. Let me know. Was this a format that you like? What could I do better in terms of my reviewing technique? And so on and so forth. It's a lot of effort, this, and I'm lazy. Thanks very much for watching, folks. Stay safe out there. Check out the map of Mars 2120. It's available over at coffee.com. Check out the game for yourself if it sounds interesting, or if the footage in the background has inspired you to try out the game for yourself. Let me know. Cheerio! Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, why not click the like button and consider subscribing. Remember, you can ring the bell notification icon to get notified when new videos go live. And until next time, cheerio.